Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello and welcome to another edition of The Big Picture. This is episode 21. Yes, episode 21 of The Big Picture. My name is John Allen Namu. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another edition of The Big Picture. Great guests, big conversations, and interesting perspectives. My name is John Allen Namu.
I'm Justine Wanda.
I'm Tom Uhwana.
And today in studio, we've got an economist who knows numbers, but speaks people. He cuts through the jargon, both for people in power and in those corridors up there, as well as those of us over here on the streets who need to understand one or two things. The chief economist of Mentoria Economics, Ken Gishinga. Thank you very much for joining us on The Big Picture, Ken.
Oh, thank you for having me, and good evening.
Asante, asante. It's great having you here, Ken. And Ken, to say that these are interesting times is to really, really undersell what's going on in this country and globally, really. And we've got such an important set of questions to ask about the budget, but more so about what it is that we are missing out on. Because, you know, we were having a discussion about we had Ramanyang seated where you were last week. And the discussion that we were having was more focused on the budget, the numbers, etc. But from an economics point of view, sometimes people tend to miss the meaning of cutting billions of shillings from healthcare, or moving numbers around from education into another place. Say the deputy president's
Cutting.
yeah, I was going to say yes. Thank you for the cutting. So, but there's so much in there. I think there's so much meaning that we tend to miss when we focus only on the budget and the finance bill as the bill itself. And this is why we thought we'd have you here, not just to talk numbers, but to really talk sense into what they all mean. But I want us to start with what has been the most unfortunate news in this country for some time from the point of view of governance and policing. The death/murder/killing of Albert Ojwang, young man, 31 years old, arrested in Homa Bay. Somehow, the people in Homa Bay, the police in Homa Bay, were unable to process him there and do all of the things that needed to happen there. Brought to Nairobi, is reportedly charged and with false publication. But when he's taken into the cells, according to the police statement, the DCI statement that was issued, was it yesterday? He was found unconscious. And the first statement was the most ridiculous one, where he supposedly injured himself, right? And very serious and now fatal head injuries, leading us to ask the question about who polices the police, right? So, Ken, I'll start with you. When you saw the news, what did it remind you of? Or what came to your mind immediately when you heard that this young man had died in a police cell in the center of Nairobi, literally Nairobi Central Police Station?
For me, I think it was extremely agonizing. That's the same police station almost 100 years ago that Harry Thuku, when people tried to help him get out, many people were shot. And that's why that road is actually called the Harry Thuku Road. For me, the fact that he's the only son of Mzee Ojwang, somebody who has just expressed his opinions on social media, it almost reminded me of how life was, when we were growing up during the dark Kano days.
Yeah.
And it's almost a reminder of, have we gotten to that situation where you can easily lose your life for expressing your opinion
Simply
in less
for
than
speaking
48
out.
hours. So for me, every prayer, every sympathy is with the father and the rest of the family.
What context actually that the road that I didn't even thought about that Harry Thuku Road would be such an important sort of road where so many injustices have taken place, not just today and over the past weekend, but over the past 1 year. Tom, you've just come from the morgue. What was the mood like, right? When you observed parents, relatives, protesters, everybody who's there and has been there throughout the day looking forward to what the outcome of the autopsy would be. What give us a sense of what the mood was like there.
The best place, well, obviously outside a morgue, the mood would be heavy because given the purpose of the place in the first place.
Yeah.
So at the center of CBD, the Central Police that you guys have mentioned, there was a lot of energy, and not just energy to jump around, but energy that is so defiant. So many people with flags, and people live streaming, people on their phones, and then what's so startling and a sober reminder of the country we live in front of those people were armed police officers, as usual, protecting this thing that they treat to be a fortress right now, Central Police. And the people are not asking for anything aside from just wanting to protect the scene of the murder of Albert. And so people kept saying that they need justice for Albert. It's the same thing that you'd hear outside the morgue at City Mortuary. But the one thing that stays in my head, even the cameraman I was with, Clint, would remember that we saw Albert Ojwang's dad walking by, but you see the instinct as a journalist is to go and hit record, but then I saw this man who was super tired because of the past few days being so grueling, not just physically, but also emotionally. But I just couldn't help but feel the pain that he feels, but at the same time just badly want to see Albert's case fully resolved. But we live in Kenya and it's 2025. And the person who did this probably was doing it at the bidding of someone else. But the energy outside City Mortuary and the energy outside outside City, the Central Police Station, they're so similar because there's so much defiance. And even right now, as you've seen the videos, even inside the morgue where the body of Albert is, there's so much defiance. And I think that's what defines today for me.
That was crazy. And the last time, in my recollection, and obviously it's happened since, but the last time that, for me, something like that happened, where people would force their way into a morgue and record and try and protect the body and ensure that the autopsy happens with all the people who need to ensure that, we're getting the right, I guess, results from the autopsy happen. The last time that I saw that was obviously in the Mandamano of 2023, right? When people are showing up in the morgues, in the hospitals, especially in Jaramogi or Odinga Teaching and Referral, but also in 2008, after the violence had kicked off, when bodies were starting to pile up in the morgues, people were forcing their way in there to be able to to count the numbers, etc. And it's an incredibly jarring and very, very scary thought that people do not trust the institutions that we have underpinning this society and would rather keep vigil for an autopsy. And an autopsy is, if anybody has ever attended an autopsy, it's an incredibly, incredibly difficult thing to observe. But for people to keep vigil so that the results of the autopsy can be trusted, that for me tells me a lot about where we are as a country, and it's not good things. Justine, you've been tweeting most of the day. You've already published content on the same, and there's so much from Albert's death that we can draw from. But I mean, given that you've been on this since the news came out, what sticks with you?
I think it's three things. The first one is a lot of the Kenyan names I get to learn every other day is from tragedy. Someone has been shot, someone was disappeared, someone was grabbed by 15 cops and bundled into a Subaru, and they won't allow even their own parents to see them. So a lot of the names I keep learning about Kenyans, it's through tragedy. It's not this Kenyan innovated something, this Kenyan built something really cool, this person is solving an issue to do with poverty or education. It's almost never positive. I'm always learning that it's someone's death. It's someone's arrest without the proper procedure. The second thing that stood out to me is, sorry, this is difficult. Albert is a teacher. He's a teacher in Voi. And I don't know if you know a lot about Voi, but they've been underserved in the education sector for a while. There are areas where some students just don't go to school. And the larger coast area has experienced this particular issue for long. So if we're talking about the police murdering a teacher, and I would understand if you failed KCSE and you have beef. I would understand you ulikuwa umekea your teachers something. But at the same time, this country has no teachers. Those very police take their kids to school. And you're murdering one so recklessly in your custody. What is that supposed to tell us? There's no, you don't care about your kids' education to a level. You don't see this person as a human being. You don't see them as someone who's contributing to society. You don't see him as a person. And I haven't seen yet any of the teaching institution unions step up and say what happened to Albert is wrong and should never happen again. I haven't seen it yet. I hope I do, because he's a very important entity in the education system which is being shattered right now. The third thing that sticks out for me is Albert is an only child and he just had a kid. I don't have anything to say about this, but as a parent who toiled for years to get their kids through school, because Albert's dad worked in a quarry. If you've ever had to do manual labor of any kind, I've had to dig a shamba, a small stretch of a shamba at some point in my life. I did not fare very well. Almost died of dehydration, and it was probably just 10 minutes. But it felt so grueling. I cannot imagine having to do a very difficult task every single day to provide for your kid, only for your kid to be shot by the state or murdered in such a difficult situation, and they're acting like what they did was not bad. The statement was he hit himself on a cell wall and was rushed to hospital and he died.
That for me, I think, was one of the things that was most upsetting about this, that he did it to himself, right? The police absolved themselves of the initial blame of a person's death in their custody, right? There are so many questions that have been asked, but that thing really was very, triggering for me. That would be the first response. Completely just absolving themselves and keeping this distance. And whoever created that statement, I don't want to read too much into why they wrote it the way that they did. I suspect that they were trying to be trying to be as distant in a way to show the public that they're going to be as professional as they can be in the investigation. Perhaps that was the thinking. But for me, it really came across as very unfeeling of what has just happened. A life was taken, a life was lost. And in the climate that we have right now, it bears so much more meaning that it would be lost in the very place, in the very institution that Kenyans have been seeking for redress and reform for such a long time. That for me is where the pain starts. But then now there's other questions, right? So, number one, this man, where was he? He was arrested in Homa Bay, right? There are police stations across the country, and including in Homa Bay County, some of which I have visited because, in the course of doing our work, we go there, right? This man was arrested for false publication, right? Which under our penal code, yes, bears a criminal charge, and you can be arrested and held for it, fine, right? But what is wrong with the cells in Homa Bay? What was wrong with the policing in Homa Bay that the man would have to be driven all the way to Nairobi, right? Number two, there's still a very big lack of clarity about his condition when he got to Nairobi, right? So there's I believe it was Albert's father who had seen him. He was bleeding through the nose and mouth, and his face was swollen. And we heard the conversation, Ken, where he's asking about safety, right? And he had defensive marks as well, right? And the third and perhaps most obvious, he wasn't in a cell on his own. Like, there's been completely zero, there's no narrative. Obviously, maybe the people are still in there, but there must have been people who witnessed what has happened here. Where are those voices, right? Fourth and finally, it comes back to the question of trust. Once again, the spotlight is on the police and IPOA, but I think more broadly on the National Police Service Commission. Because what this tells us is that for the many, many attempts that have been made to reform the police force, there still is a very brutal streak within the force itself that would allow for something like this to happen, and for the initial sort of like reflex to be to hide who was behind this, right? Because I mean, it shouldn't have taken complaint, it shouldn't have taken anger from the public for the Inspector General of Police to recognize that there was an officer commanding station who was responsible for that police station. There was a sentry, right? There were people who arrested him. There were people in the cell. There were so many people who could have offered the right kind of information before they come out with something like that, right? Why does it always have to take public complaint for the police to act professionally? And this is a question that we must contend with, because we need the police. We need the police to protect us. We need the police to enforce the laws. But how do we trust the police if this is what happens when in the very station, in the very police station that they have? Like, look, there's so much to read into this that I don't even know, in coming days what's going to emerge. But Tom, there are a couple of updates, obviously, on the autopsy itself. It was supposed to have taken place. You were down there. You spoke to people. What's the latest?
From the source at the moment, when he got there at around 1 p.m., I remember Hussein Khalid was there. He's the founder of Vocal Africa. Well, he said that they were trying to get an autopsy done today.
Yeah.
And that's what everyone, including the family, was out there to do, but they couldn't. And as the day progressed, you saw reports of there being issues with who's going to do the autopsy, who's the professional, the chief pathologist. There seems to be issues around that from reports.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, time passes, and then now, I think we were just on the phone with Hussein Khalid, who said that the autopsy is going to be done tomorrow for other reasons. Yeah. But one of the big questions that he had at that time was, why is the government not pushing ahead faster with the autopsy of this very big case? Yeah. Which is, frankly, the biggest problem in Kenya as we speak.
Yeah. Ken, again, when you look at this, perhaps even from the lens of an economist, what does this inspire? What kind of sentiment would this kind of thing typically inspire in terms of how people look at Kenya as, you know, because one of the things that people look for when they want to invest is safety, right? So what does this inspire?
Absolutely. When investors look at a country, they look at a couple of variables. They look at macroeconomic indicators. They look at law and order. They look at contract enforcement, the judiciary, the justice system. And you're right, we do need the police for stability. I remember on June 25th last year, I was actually caught up in Tomboya on Development House. And at that time, goons had actually taken over that building. And it was extremely scary because the Gen Z were outside the building, but now goons had actually entered. And I remember people, when you even heard of a tear gas, you actually felt happy because it meant the police was nearby. So anarchy is a terrible outcome. But it's so sad that we got to a point where, yes, you want to prevent anarchy, but you get to a point where due course is no longer respected. People can make decisions at their own cost, and it's not really a current thing. We've seen even court orders being disobeyed over the last few years. So this is a trend of a culture of impunity that's building up. And obviously for an investor coming in, somebody wants to buy land and he feels, okay, if somebody takes over this land, I can go to a court and get my reprieve. The fact that that comes into question actually becomes very, very concerning. So it's not the type of headlines you want to see. I would say if somebody arrived at Jomo Kenyatta tomorrow morning or today morning and held a copy of the Standard of the Nation and looked at that headline and see a young person really barely expressing an opinion on social media and loses his life, I mean, it's very worrying. When I listened to that clip of the last phone call that the young man had, I mean, it's heartbreaking if you listen to it, because he asks his friend, you know, I've never been in this situation, am I safe? And his friend says, you might have a few challenges here and there, I've been to industrial area, but you'll survive.
Yeah, actually, I remember one of the statements was like, the only thing you won't have is your freedom. And for a person to have said that, you know, you're almost trying to reassure the guy, like, look, you'll be out, it's just your freedom that you'll be robbed of. For that to be one of the last conversations that you have with a person, can you imagine how that feels, right?
That's, I feel like, to your point, there's something you said about where you were caught up in June 25th, and you said goons took over Development House. That's so metaphorical. Because like outside, people are asking for the right things, but there's goons in there just terrorizing everyone. And I think that can be applied across the board. It's not just like robbing people of their livelihoods. It's also just like robbing people of their sense of self, sense of security. Because right now, a lot of Kenyans will look at cops and they're like, I don't feel safe. You've already created such a big barrier between the state and people who they're supposed to protect. So everyone is like, we only have each other. And then the people could like turn around and make you a target. Because they're like, if you're not a safe person to be around, why are you even around us in the first place?
That is incredibly, like, it's incredibly astute, but also very scary to imagine that then our protectors become the very people that we, you know, as Kenyans might now start thinking about running from or attacking, right? And nobody wants that in a country like ours. Nobody wants the police to be a symbol of hatred, right? But it appears like the work is so hard to do that. It's just upsetting. Look, there's some comments that have come through already. David Mainandungu says, Kenya needs a hard reset. Bad governance, corruption, and impunity are choking families. Obviously, Milton Were has tapped into the sentiment of the day and he said it's really sad. Pato on YouTube is saying it's sad that even our police stations are now becoming crime scenes, right?
Those are the places where crime should be investigated.
The irony. The irony is just, it's really almost too heavy to bear. And what that led to yesterday evening on X was a very interesting conversation, I must say, where there was an X space that was hosted by Hanifa Aden, who we've had on the show as well. And she was asking the question, when is the protest? And I spent maybe the first hour or so listening to Kenyans ventilate about what was happening. A lot of the same sentiments that we shared here have been shared. But it almost seems as if June has become this month where, you know, Kenyans are having this moment of reckoning with every single element of governance that we're having issues with. You know, we're here to talk about the economy today. We'll speak about, you know, why this is such a significant month. There's Albert, you know, Ojwang and what his death means. There's the impunity that we've seen in our political discourse, you know, the tribalism that seems to be being stoked on so many levels. But the conversation was interesting to me for another reason. Because, you know, the laws that we have that say that there should be 3 days notice prior to protest, a lot of people are feeling deflated by that and perhaps even turned off by that because they wanted to go out into the streets at that very moment. And it really forced me to ask the question, then what happens in the meantime as we wait for these 3 days, etc., whether there'll be a protest? What, I don't say what are people so afraid of, because there's reasons why you should have some sort of, like, you know, notice period, but I don't even know what I want to ask anymore. I guess what confused me about that, or what struck me about that moment, was how many people on the space were willing to just drop everything and go out and say, like, look, I don't care if it's Hanifa, I don't care if it's this person. Me, I'm going out because I feel this issue.
I remember even Hanifa saying that you need, you know, for protest and activism, you know, you need to organize, print out leaflets, print out T-shirts, and she said, we might need to postpone it to Tuesday because we need T-shirts for this. And she got backlash for that, which is a good thing, actually, because if you think about it, it means that people don't want to wait. People are so eager.
There's an urgency.
There's an urgency, and people want to step out now and now. So,
And also, I think a lot of people are pushing back because it's not about the T-shirts and the placards. It's about the
about
feeling,
the protest,
the sentiment, the protest, the significance, and also just making sure that this moment is not overtaken by another cycle of tragedy, or we don't see something else come up where they try to divert the story from what we are actually seeing. So I think the immediate protest also kind of counters any narrative that could be conjured up by the people in authority, where we've seen them try and toy with people's feelings, and people have to hold the line for the message again and again and again.
Do you think that there's any leader, and I'll start with you, Ken, do you think that there's any leader at this point in time in our country, be it someone in the economic space, someone in the political space, any leader of any sort, who, if they stood up and spoke about this moment and either counseled for calm or counseled for people to go out into the streets, that people would listen to? Or has the trust quotient in our country become so denigrated that, as we were talking about Offset, people only feel like they have one another? And what does this say about our country?
Well, that's a difficult question. I mean, obviously, if it's about ability to communicate, I've always been a big fan of PLO, Lumumba. I think he has a sense of gravitas that is able to move people in a way. Maybe he's been a bit detached from these events in recent years, but I feel sad that we've not nurtured, and maybe this should start within the campuses, you know, that sense of rising to the occasion, that sometimes even the oratory, to be able to make people understand the significance. You know, when this happened to George Floyd in the United States, it changed the course of history. You know, we saw that movement became global. What we are witnessing here, you know, if people put in their thoughts and their words in the right place, could actually trigger
It could.
what we saw with George Floyd.
Yeah.
So perhaps it's maybe we need to invest more. I think spontaneous agitation has its place,
Yeah.
but you do feel that there's room for some deeper reckoning.
And I guess also like some deeper civic work to ensure that these moments are not lost, right? And that Albert Ojwang doesn't become yet another statistic, another person, another young man who was killed. The final thing that I want us to get into before we kind of move forward, and there's still lots of comments coming in. Thanks a lot for the comments on both on X as well as on YouTube, is the disinformation, the misinformation that A, led up to this, right? And B, has come, you know, in the slipstream of this very, you know, calamitous event, right? So Tom, again, you've seen some of this. Yeah. That post, that initial headline, right? When was it first posted, or when, you know, around when? Because I think a lot of people are still asking, what did this guy post? Yeah.
Now, to be clear, we're not sure if it's that specific fake headline that caused this, but it's the only headline that I can think of, or the only piece of information that I can think of, which would mention this specific individual, which is the DIG, right? That headline surfaced over a month ago, if I remember clearly, because I remember the timeline. I've tried scrolling X and trying to find it on my profile, but it's Elon Musk's platform. Things just go crazy. The whole thing breaks down when you scroll thrice. But
man, Musk has his own problems right now.
He has relationship issues. So this specific headline, it's the one that we're speaking about. It surfaced over a month and a half ago.
Yeah,
I remember it surfaced on an evening, and influencers shared it out of anger at that time. And the Standard came out to flag it, saying it's fake.
Yeah,
and immediately people were aware that it's fake, and everyone stopped sharing it. Then I saw it resurface again sometime in the middle of the month, last month, then it disappeared completely. But this is an old headline, and he 100% is not the first person who shared it. The question is, why him? That's the one question that I've asked myself so many times. Why him? But it also raises a lot of questions about surveillance. How do you know that this Twitter user lives in a certain sub-village inside Homa Bay, which has 8 sub-counties? So that's looking for a needle in a haystack, right? Unless you had help from someone finding him. The question
that's a really interesting and important point, that people tend to get, you know, lost with all that has happened. The question of surveillance of the public. Question is who is helping in this surveillance, and what should we do as Kenyans to... and there's I in another word as well. So there's I in a lot of words. I don't know.
Even Justine has an I, right?
Well, true. And Justine, coming to you before we move forward, right? Look, I typically don't like to engage people who seem to be akin to spreading disinformation or spreading false or harmful narratives. But there's a couple, or at least one that I saw from December, you know, about igniting Luo hatred, and that this is being used by very hateful politicians. I saw Karen Nyamu sort of, expressing outrage about the death, but also saying that our opposition is used to doing very evil things. And I'm like, hizo mbili zinaingiana wapi? You know, so again, you know, I guess in a society that has, you know, a democracy in terms of what the things that we can say or the debate that we can have, ultimately you will have people who take another view. But for me, it's not the other views that I'm concerned about. It's just how the death itself has been instrumentalized to play into the politics of the day that I have a problem with. Thus the mentioning of these specific posts, right?
I think at the core of a lot of misinformation and disinformation, it's not just to cause people to mistrust each other, to mistrust the things that they see or read. A lot of misinformation is supposed to make you question what it is you're watching, what it is you're viewing. Is this true? So if you're doubting yourself, you're always trying to find a narrative that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So that's what, and I'll give an example of what happened in the US. The AfriForum people took advantage of like their whiteness and their position in the economy to say there's a white genocide. It's a white woman like Solidarity, I think. It's like two very big lobbying groups for farmers and a lot of big players in the South African economy.
Yeah.
Yes, and they pushed that narrative to the fore. And regular South Africans were just like, why are you people lying? The problem that South Africa has very little to do with race at the moment and a lot to do with crime. So what you're looking at is crime. If there's anything that's happening to people, it has a lot to do with like economic disadvantages of a lot of people. And some people feel like crime is the only way they get to make money.
Yeah.
So if that is not addressed, more people are going to die. But AfriForum and Solidarity kept holding the line for white genocide. The narrative kind of just snowballed and became this huge thing. It was picked up by like some infringement of white Twitter, which is most of Twitter, and then and then it was like amplified by the world's richest man and the owner of the platform, Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And there are people who do not look beyond the headlines. They're like, there's a white genocide. Let's go save the whites in South Africa. And I was like, what? Like, call a South African. Like, look up the stories you're looking for before you get too excited to go save the whites. So, like, what ended up happening is that story got to Trump's White House. Yeah. And Trump shares misinformation all the time because most of the people who follow him are not reading the news. Those people
they just want his hot takes.
Yes, they believe his word is bond. Whatever he's saying goes, and like they want to be associated with with his life in gold. I don't know what people are trying to get associated with, but like they want to hold the line for him so badly, they'll believe anything he shares. So when they went to when the South African government went to the White House, and they were being shown photos of Congo, and you imagine the leader of the quote-unquote free world is so misinformed. He's showing people photos of things that do not even, like, did not happen in South Africa. So a lot of the Americans who saw that story were looking for a narrative that made sense to them. So picture that very thing happening here, and it's the same thing that happened with the PS for Foreign Affairs. He shared a deepfake video of Sudan and why Kenya's helping or like meddling in their affairs was justified. And everyone was like, this is a deepfake video. We know this was not a segment on Farid Zakaria's show. We know this is a lie. And it was up for hours. And it took the speaking out of a lot of Kenyans, yes, to be like, this is wrong. You are actually a representative of this nation. You're supposed to take this down. And eventually it was taken down, but there was no consequences. No one was held accountable. So
the same video was actually flipped during the Tanzania-Kenyan issue.
Yes, it was used again. So misinformation and disinformation inherently are used to make people question themselves and the narratives that they're actually supposed to be believing.
And align with the closest and most closely held biases.
Yes. Yeah. So when someone uses the tribalism narrative, the ethnicity narrative in like such a misinformed way, it's so that people who are like, oh yeah, this is a possibility, can jump on that wave, create a whole narrative around it, and just create a reality in which that's truth.
Yeah.
When in real life, we're grappling with police brutality, which is a very big problem, state-sanctioned violence, which is a really big problem, and extrajudicial killings, which is a really big problem.
And taking our eyes off the ball.
Yes.
That for me is the point, that you would want so much distraction to take place that people then forget that a life has been lost. A father has been, a child has been robbed of their father, like months old. Man, yoki tunauma, man. And anyway, we've got some comments here. Naomi Noni says, this has been an utterly depressing day for Kenyans and an utterly depressing start to the week for us all. We are truly not all right. Look, I wish I could argue differently, but this is really something that's very heavy to start the week with and carry on through the week, Kiragu Kogia says, investigations will reveal what we already suspect. They had brutalized and tortured that young man. not long before they even got to Central Police Station. Phantom says, this man, quote unquote, has made life valueless in this country. And there's something that, I was saying as well yesterday. It seems as if the brutality is the point. Yes. Like, this is the exact point that he wants people to get to, or the state generally wants people to get to, where they're so afraid of the state that they won't engage, right, in asking questions about, and keeping people accountable. That for me is really a very, very worrisome time, especially when we have so much to keep our eyes on. And I guess this is a perfect segue to now speak about, the economy. We obviously, the finance bill is going to be read in a couple of weeks, and there's already lots of concern. Man, you need to be locked in a room with Sudi and ask him all of these questions.
No.
And everything else.
I am not a motorbike. No, please. Yeah.
Just picky.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, right? But it does sort of like get us to the point where we start asking more philosophical questions about the economy that we are building, yes, right? And Ken, maybe this one takes you back a little bit, but if you were to start from when you had this realization and into today, when did you first realize, like, the economy is not just about numbers, right? But it's about people's futures, also about the destiny of a country. Like, when did that moment click for you? Maybe perhaps as a younger man, and thinking about it now, right? Like, is there a particular story or a particular narrative that keeps you up at night thinking, yo, man, the guys might be talking about numbers and figures and taxes here, but this is really fundamentally about people's lives and futures?
I can't say there was one moment.
Yeah.
I think it's been a series of realizations. Mm-hmm. One of the metrics we use to measure the health of an economy is GDP. And GDP is a very limited indicator, but this is an indicator that the country time and times talks about. Our economy grew at 5% GDP. The problem with that statistic is, from a Kenyan perspective, number one, it's really driven by public sector investments, infrastructure, roads, SGR. And the people who play in those spaces tend to be foreign entities. So even when the project is delivered, the cash flow associated with that transaction is repatriated back to China, to Europe, to the US. And that's where we got to a place, you remember in the Uhuru administration, where people are saying we can't eat roads.
Yeah.
And the former central bank governor saying people can't eat GDP. In a way, it was alluding to there is something limiting about using that indicator, which is a sharp contrast to the United States, where they do look at GDP, but it's not the most important statistic. In the United States, unemployment and inflation are actually the two most important macroeconomic indicators. Every first Friday of the month, they publish the unemployment numbers. And that makes a lot of sense because that's where the real human beings are. People getting jobs that provide them dignity. So for the longest time, I've always been trying to appeal to our authorities to let's focus more on how many jobs are being created. Yes, you can have good GDP, but if money is being repatriated out of the country, people don't have jobs. What's the point of it all?
True.
And why can't we start publishing every first Friday unemployment numbers across counties, across sectors? So even if you're a university student, you'll be able to say, oh, okay, I can see tourism in Machakos is doing well, so let me look for a job
opportunity there.
So that conversation has never actually taken root. So it's fundamentally the structural problem with how we measure economic prosperity.
One of these, I guess, back of the envelope indicators that people tend to use is, I can't remember what the metric was called, but essentially you open your fridge, if you have a fridge, and just look at the number of things that are in the fridge, then that can tell you a lot about how things are doing. If people were to now use the evidence of their eyes, right? To then get a sense of what's really happening here. The government's telling us that the economy is growing, right? But I don't feel it. Like, what are one of those indicators that every Kenyan can look to and be like, you know what, hapa kuna shida.
Also, can I just add to the question?
Yeah.
Outside of indicators, one of my favorite things that John Stewart said is, instead of having like the stock market with the bar, with the scroll bar on business news, they should just put like individual names of people to just see, oh, Rani has lost his house. Oh, this guy has lost his second job. Because the moment you see that, like, that reflection really tells you, okay, this
Like,
situation is bad. And like, what's an equivalent of, I guess it's the same question in a sense, but like, what is like a day to day that would be an indicator, like a month to month, that would show that the economy is not doing well, especially for the people who live here?
That's a really good question. And the main indicators, number one, you could just look at basic social spaces. We've just come from a long Eid weekend. That's an example of a time when you should expect to see a lot of travel, a lot of fun and festivity. And you start talking to traders and they'll tell you, we've not sold as much as we did last year. Then you have also things such as M-Pesa publishes data on how much transactions are happening. And the last statistic they published was actually, they showed the number of transactions. The amount has actually come down.
It's come down.
So it tells you people having to navigate with smaller and smaller. They're doing more transactions, but smaller and smaller transactions. So there are many of those proxy indicators. This is one controversial one called the Hot Waitress Index. Very controversial.
No, we are now invested in this conversation.
It's in a remote part of economics that says, if you go to a restaurant and you see, a beautiful lady servicing you, that lady in a good economy would be in a marketing department, would be in a top corporate, but now, and maybe she studied marketing, but now she's serving you at your local kibandaski. Now he talks about underemployment, where you have people who in another economy would be managers. Sometimes you talk to Uber drivers and they'll give you a good analysis of what's happening in the economy. In another world, there'll be a bank manager. In another world, this lady would be head of marketing, a director of marketing, but because of conditions, they have come down. So they're the formal and informal sort of proxies that tell you. But ultimately, it's about purchasing power. You'll find, and you'll talk to managers of various businesses, and you really ask them, how is business? And they'll tell you, we used to get, this client used to come 4 times a week. Now they just come once a week. So people kind of reduce on consumption, and that's really the number one indicator.
For me, there's 2 indicators that I look to, completely informal, and the barbershop index. No, not conversation. The index. Because like if you've been to a barbershop long enough, right? Because when you find a good barber, you stick with them, and it almost becomes part of like your schedule, right? Mbona unataka kucheka wewe?
Because Tom took a chance on his hairline a couple of weeks ago.
I took a chance.
Stop my hairline. I was like,
no, Tom, these are the mistakes we make in youth. So I don't begrudge you all of this.
I'm not an experienced man, right?
All of us have made these mistakes. Don't worry. Hata mimi kuna siku it was almost recently deceased ilikuwa hapa. Right? Huko nyuma. Hey, my friend.
We can tell.
You could tell. Unasema nini hapa wewe? Anyway, like that index is a good one for me to sort of like indicate who's there, because like every other weekend we go for a shave with my boys, right? And you'd find the same crowd of people, like a dad bringing his sons to go and have a shave. And things are kosher. You have similar conversations, etc. You have, especially with barbershops that have been able to develop the same kind of clientele. This weekend, and I guess for the past, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 fortnights, I've noticed that, number one, the clientele for where I go has become very unstable, right? You'll have random like walk-in guys, right? And then you'll always have like 2 or 3 chairs that are unoccupied, right? And then the number of kids who are being shaved has also, it's plummeted. So I was like, yo, man, there's something else, happening here. So I just want to go around the room. Tom, what is the informal thing that you can tell like things are changing when you look at the economy? If you want to know that Tom's microeconomy is changing. Doing well, yes. By the way, you might be one of the exceptions, Tom, by the way.
Nah.
Tupigie watu wa accounts nini makofi.
Conflict of interest. Conflict of interest. This conversation, you shouldn't know that. But for me, it usually is, if I have, I know this is a very stupid thing, but if I have disposable income enough to buy Nivea moisturizer.
Hey, Tom.
Let me explain why. Let me explain why. You guys know that small can or roll-on?
Yes.
Those things have become significantly expensive. How I knew that things were doing badly is because the prices of those things changed. And away from all of that, it's an indicator of how much money I have to spend on things that aren't food or family. You understand?
True.
So if the bottle of Nivea runs dry and I don't have money to afford it, or I feel like it's a lot of money in Arimis, then I know that things are doing badly. But away from all of that, cab guys, I like to use them as an example a lot because these are the people that I interact with that are outside my house, that are businessmen on a regular basis, and you spend enough time around them to speak to them on a one-on-one basis. And if business is doing badly for cab guys, it means that folks like you and I, regular people, don't have money to spend on cab services. That's how I know. So if the cab guy, ask him how his business and ananiambia things are doing badly, things were much better in 2020 or 2017, then I know that things are doing badly because, as he said, there's a lot less, and that's what the guest we had last week on disposable income. Was it last week?
We had Rama last week.
Rama, yes. When you say that you're decimating industries and you're also disposable income, you're just choking it to death. That's how I know, because regular Kenyans don't take cabs every day. They use matatus. So if the cab guys are in business well and it's booming, and then one day they tell you, suddenly the switch goes, and over the past year they've been telling you business is bad, and you see it. If you have relatives who are doing the cab business, you see that they're not doing as well. You see that things are not as good as they were. They're spending a lot more days on the road, 2 days without seeing their family because they're trying to.
Plus the number of cash rides that they take versus the number of card rides that they decline.
Exactly.
If there was an index like that, you'd see and how many times they PT at the petrol station.
I'm so interested to see the figures on Bolt's and Uber's side, because those stats might be very interesting, because I'm sure they look like this.
Justine?
I think the Nitumia 2K urgentlies. The number of texts around not just your family, your friends, and sometimes a lot of people feel very ashamed to ask, especially if you ask the first time and someone helped you out. Asking a second time almost always feels like such a task. Because it's like, what if that person has not made back the money? I have not paid them back the thing that I told them I would pay them, and now I'm even in a worse situation. And a lot of it is just to like get by. It's just money for food, or money to not to be ashy like Tom here. It's a little.
Us, by the way. I think that's a good job.
No, by the way, it's all right. It's a strong brand, inelastic to economic situations, and used both by very different categories in the market. So Tom,
good Tom. The second
lakini mbona
thing.
unamuita Ashi surely?
No.
Angalia vile sura inameremeta kama nini.
The second indicator for me is when I visit. It's not just me, but like when I visit my friends, or like when I go to my brother's house, and it just has like those off-brand things.
Yes.
The remote is he sends. the the soap is Omosh, like everything. I'm trying not to use real brand names because I'm very respectful of you guys' business, but like everyone has like an off-brand thing going.
See, the soap
And
is
I'm like,
Omosh.
this looks like it could vaporize your hands. I'm very concerned. But like at the same time, a lot of people will have to adjust, so they go for the cheapest thing sometimes. And some of these things are, I'm not saying they're not quality, but they're brands you've never seen before. And I'm like, that's like such an indicator for me, because it just means a lot of people are trying to adjust as much as they can. Or like a lot of people are going for wholesale shopping, which just ends up being even more money, especially if you have to travel far. Like, you've saved 30 shillings, but it's cost you 50 shillings more in fuel. So like, the margins are not making any sense.
Making sense.
If you wanted the Msemakweli indicator, the true indicator that nobody can dispute, because you'll find in many other indicators, people can always come up. An alternative, they'll tell you, oh, did you see how many people went to the Kiambu Road Club last night? So many people spending. But the real indicator, if you need to have a very deep economic conversation, is on non-performing loans. And this is a statistic that is published by the CBK. In fact, tomorrow they have the monetary policy committee where they'll publish. And they always give a very good analysis of all the indicators. But you really want to look at the non-performing loans. Last time it came at 17.2%. And that was the highest it's ever been since they collected data. And what is a non-performing loan? This is a business or a household or an individual who's gone to a bank. You've been assessed and you're worthy of credit. And you've been given a loan and you've gone 3 months without servicing that loan. So these are people who, in another world, they would want to be servicing. But because of economic conditions, maybe because of pending bills, their contractors who have been paid by government defaulted on their loans. That, for me, is the number one measure of how an economy is doing. That number used to be in the single digits, 8-9%. Now it's at 17%. It's almost telling you out of every 5 borrowers, one is falling behind.
He's struggling to pay.
And that is really, now, you can't really have a debate around that now.
Some people say that the options page of the papers these days is quite long.
It's like a little booklet.
Exactly.
I think also one of the things I forgot to mention is the amount of meal skipping. There's so sometimes you talk to someone and they just casually tell you, oh, I just have 1 meal a day. And it's not like a problem to them because that's how they survive, or that's how they get to stretch out that 1,000 bob so they can feed their kids. I'll give an example of what has been happening with university students over the last, I think, 6 or 7 years. They do a thing called Quinama, where they don't eat certain meals. They either eat 1 meal or eat 1 meal over a couple of days. And these are the very people who are supposed to be studying. They're already, a lot of them have come from homes where they're struggling to pay fees. And with the whole university funding model changing and them having less in loans to like help them with upkeep, it's actually becoming a real problem. And we need a lot more investigations into this and how just like economic indicators, sometimes people don't view the Venn diagram across like generational struggle, where someone will refuse to ask their parents for money because they know their parents are in a dire situation and they have other siblings, so they'll sacrifice themselves for the now to get by. And then I don't think everyone is making it out of these situations. Some people, this affects how they study, their level of comprehension, because there are statistics indicating that meals are very critical in just helping people get by, and that kind of runs up in them being able to read, in them being able to engage in classes. Even just leaving your dorm room all the way to class, you could be affected in a way that, okay, Tom nilete notes, because you actually can't go.
But now just look at the real numbers. Actually, I was just trying to bring them up here. Now, not just of people who are in school but are missing meals or are having to stretch out their money. let's look at capitation as an example, right? So the required capitation is 76.7 billion, right? What's been allocated in the finance bill is, I believe, 54 billion. There's a funding gap of 21.85 billion, right? Yes. So according to this study, almost 1 million students are on hold. 1 million students, right? Let's look at primary and JSS, right? Disbursements levels have fallen to 50%, right? Primary schools, it's half, 1,420 per learner. JSS, only half of the 15,000 needed per learner is what they're getting, right? Co-curricular funds, 76 bob per primary learner, yeah? So there's a huge, shortfall. First term, the shortfall is 7.5 billion shillings, right? So we know what the numbers are, Ken. But when there are these kinds of shortfalls, what is the compounding effect on the economy? Not just in terms of money that's not being invested, but on the economic value of people who are supposed to have benefited from these investments. I think that's a conversation we don't seem to be having because we're all only focused on the numbers.
I think the productivity levels go down. People obviously start skipping classes. People perform worse off in exams, so they're not able to reach their full potential. They don't go to the ideal schools, so it becomes a vicious life cycle, which leads to underemployment, where somebody has to settle for a job much less than what their potential could have been. There's been statistics showing that early childhood education, the investments you make there, have a lifetime effect. And the more people start missing schools in those early ages, whether it's through truancy or any other form, has lifetime. And that's what you saw during COVID, when people were out of school for quite a long time. It became a social crisis because people said this is actually, when you're 1 year behind your peers globally, it creeps in, it lowers productivity, it lowers morale. John Allen, I think you remember the days of Maziwa Yanyayo. Every Friday you'd get milk, and it has a morale booster that comes with it. And for me, it's a bit interesting because I don't think they've seen the economic possibilities of connecting the agriculture industry with education. Because the beauty of it is farmers are always looking for markets, and there's no better market
than a school,
because it's constant demand. So even as a farmer, you don't have to worry about will I get market or not. It's this virtuous cycle that can really build an economy. So the fact that we are not alive to that dynamic that can really propel both agriculture and education, for me it's a bit disturbing.
If you were the cabinet secretary at this moment, now looking at presenting this finance bill, and there were a couple of things that you could play around with to ensure that not only are these shortfalls either minimized or completely eliminated, but that we get the kind of budget that Kenyans deserve that would then now take them longer term, into longer term prosperity. What are the 2 or 3 things that you're doing?
I think number one, I'd look at the pending bills. We're about 600 billion shillings owed to contractors. These are people who've done a piece of job, have delivered on their part. Many of them have been financed by the bank. Some of them have been auctioned off. Very traumatizing. Some have even committed suicide, unfortunately. So really, and I know there was a committee that was meant to verify, but I think it's moving way too slowly. Right now, only about 200 of that 600.
This was the Edward Ouko committee on pending bills, right? The former Auditor General, yes.
Correct. So I remember when Kenya Kwanza was vying for the 2022 election, one of the ideas that was being put out there was, let's issue a bond and let's raise money to clear this off. And I thought that was a pretty innovative idea. But it was quickly swept away. And they said, let's come up with a committee that will go contractor by contractor. For me, I think it's delayed. Justice delayed really is justice denied.
True.
And for me, I think that would be the first one, just to clear all the pending bills. Let people have money in their pockets. In a way, it acts almost as a stimulus into the economy, because once the contractor is paid, he can pay his rent,
he can pay his
workers, and money starts circulating.
Yeah.
Number two, I'd look at the Kazi kwa Vijana program. We have our levels of unemployment are approaching 40%. We need to put young people to work. And there was that idea that had been there. And this is a problem. There's always a good idea that has been there in the past, but somehow is killed. Make sure that any unemployed young person in the neighborhood is part of a group that can do some service to the community, and they are paid every Friday. They are paid, and part of it is put in a savings. What does that do? It makes sure that money circulates in the local economy. The mama mboga has a bit of cash. They can circulate. That young person is not idle, so he's not in these betting apps, but is actually doing some meaningful work in the community, making relations, and actually networking in a way for better jobs. So I think that would be the second one. Number three, I'd say looking at the agriculture sector, only 78 billion shillings has been allocated. This is an economy of 55 billion people. I think we need, in Kenya, when you talk about agriculture, we only talk about fertilizer subsidy, but there's a lot in terms of knowledge transfer to farmers.
Extension services.
Remember the time we had the locust issue and some farmers had to use Omo, which was so sad, and we have institutions like Calro that have been there for 100 years, but that information
doesn't reach the farmer.
To the farmers. So you get a lot of, part of the reason we have so much concentration of unemployed people in the towns is many of them have abandoned their farms. And if they knew what they could do with those farms, many of them would not even be in the city. They'd be growing stuff for domestic use, for export.
True.
And that. So I would say those would be probably the three main issues I'd probably look at, alongside maybe starting to reduce VAT.
Okay. Guys, we're coming towards the end of the show. I mean, there's so much that we still have on the table to discuss, but I want to start with you, Tom. You've also been focusing on the finance bill and the economy, etc., and you've been looking into various things. Like, what's your take? What's your take on the research that you've been doing around the finance bill, and what do you have to tell people in terms of public participation and perhaps the things that we ought to look forward to?
Well, a lot has been said about the finance bill, but I feel as if the one thing that has been missing has been to juxtaposition Ruto's and Kenya Kwanza's policies versus their utterances. Because one is words, the other one is proper actions. So we did some research into it, as we always do. And I'll pick four sectors of this economy that we'll particularly focus on, right? We've had Ruto talk big on expanding the tax bracket, but at the same time making and injecting money into the Kenyan economy. Well, that's a noble idea. But what is he exactly doing? I'll pick four. First of all, he's promised, and I'll pick the manifesto from 2022 because that's what people trusted as the thing that would put the ballot in Ruto's favor, and that they actually did. So first of all, inputs on locally manufactured pharmaceutical products, Biovax. He's spoken big on Africa, and he's a very, very Afri-optimist / Pan-Africanist in his words, right? Spoken big on vaccine imbalance, and even 2 days ago, we saw the government spokesman speaking about the lack of vaccines for infants in this country, which is saddening. So,
like, we always have a BCG shortage every year, right? Like since our first child was born, BCG could not. Anyway, but
so BCG, COVID happened. Africa realized that there's vaccine that need to be manufactured here to save African lives. Kenya throws its hat in the ring, says, you guys come manufacture here. We have an enabling environment for you to come and manufacture. And he says this in his manifesto, to quote, work with pharmaceutical industry to address the tax regime and cost of doing business. Now, 3 years down the line, he is removing the zero rating of inputs into locally manufactured pharmaceutical products and making them 16% vertical. Does that really show somebody who's trying to build that industry? No. Secondly, let's go to EVs. He talks big on climate change, right? Cutting the carbon, what's it called? Carbon emissions, big on carbon credits, even speaks in the EU, speaks in Africa. He rode in a yellow vehicle. You guys remember that dramatic entrance into an event in KICC? But what does he do? He says this in his manifesto: leverage the financial support that will be provided to the border sector through the Hustler Fund to develop the nascent EV motorcycle assembly industry. Big, promising. Then what does he go on to do? He does the same thing. He removes the tax incentives that would cushion industries that would develop in Kenya to try and make EVs a big thing. And if you use Bolt, if you use Little, if you use any of these apps, you know that there is that option for Bolt Electric.
Yeah.
I know Bolt because it has that option. And people use it. And if you go on Kenyan roads, you see motorcycles that don't look exactly like you'd see a Boxer or any of these.
Very silent motorcycles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a lot silent. And e-mobility is a big thing here in Kenya. A lot of manufacturers and assemblers are coming to Kenya to set up these companies. But then what does the government do? Turns on them, places more tax on them. Thirdly, the same thing, pledging support of electric mobility. And he says we are going to, this is before this finance bill, the electric bicycles, motorcycles, solar and lithium batteries, some electric buses, locally assembled and manufactured phones. Those phones were zero rated, those bikes were zero rated, and those cars were zero rated. And what does he do? He again removes them from zero rated to exempt status, which means that they can't ask for a refund on the VAT, which would then mean that if you are a young person in Kenya who's going to buy a motorbike that is EV, a motorbike that is electric, if you want to buy a bicycle that is electric, if you want to buy a car that is electric, it's expensive when this finance bill is passed than now. So it makes it basically expensive for Kenyans, young Kenyans like me and you, Justine, to put their money into bikes that would generate income for them. And lastly, touches in the heart of Kenyan lives, right? Construction and equipping of specialized hospitals. He talks big on cancer care. Went from, what was the first one, to Taifa Care. There was UHC, Justine, there was this huge change to Taifa Care.
Sorry, man. I don't
You can't keep track anymore.
But
Hauna maoni.
But talked big on making specialized care a big thing. Spoke of dialysis being accessible to Kenyans, spoke of putting more hospitals up, went village by village promising a hospital, and also promised specialized care in it. But what does he do? He says...
He promised what?
Yeah, did promise a lot of efficient...
Specialized healthcare.
Yes, that was
telemedicine, etc. Like there are a lot of promises that have been made around healthcare, not least to be able to build on the equipping of hospitals across the country via the managed equipment leasing scheme, which is its own, kind of worms. But anyway, conclude.
But basically, is his entire government, including governors that are elected under UDA, go place to place opening hospitals, and they promise efficient healthcare to Kenyans. But what does he go on to do? He says that construction and equipping of specialized hospitals with a minimum capacity of 50 beds will be from tax exempt to 16% vatable. So if you are a hospital that is looking to expand into other regions into Kenya and you want to construct specialized healthcare wings, it's going to be more expensive for you after this finance bill than it was today. So, and to put it into further perspective, we only have 11% of hospitals, according to a census report by the Ministry of Health, 11% of hospitals have specialized care, just 11%. In a country of 44 plus million people? This is worrying, but what does he do? Instead of putting specific focus into injecting money into manufacturing, into vaccine production locally, into making EVs a common thing in Kenya, to making assemblers come into this country, locally made mobile phones. He talks big on tech and enabling the tech community. But he's then moving these products from one to B, and B being terrible for their business.
Or a category that's taxable or you can't claim.
Exactly.
Ken, I just want to jump back to you very quickly because Tom has read us a laundry list of some of the things that in the finance bill that we ought to be concerned about. Is there anything to smile about from the bill? from your recollection?
Well, there is the issue of amount being put into construction. And a lot of people are saying you're not seeing any construction, road construction happening. About 196 billion, which is still a bit small, but we do have an infrastructure gap in Kenya that needs to be sorted, not least in the rural areas where farmers have to even pour milk because they can't take their produce to the market. So I think that infrastructure, if it's able to be pushed, I think that can be positive. There was the proposal about pay bans in terms of income tax, although that hasn't quite made it, where there was a proposal to try and increase the pay bans so that we have a more progressive tax base. I think that's a discussion that's still being looked into Parliament, because what we do want is to have a progressive tax system where people are able to handle a tax responsibility that's proportionate to their station in life. So if that pay band, if they can increase, and I think that's one of the things that is in discussion, that can make
it can make a difference.
It can make a difference. Yeah.
All right, all right, Justine. I think your parting shots are around saying one thing, doing another. Surprise us.
I think one of the things that we've seen happen this week has been, just like this week starting, I mean, is how government advisors or freelancers of our money, like these people have decided to take the opportunity to act like they're not part of the government. So what's the name of that guy again?
Which one?
It's called Professor
Mutua,
who was very vehemently opposed to this government. And then I think the base expanded a little bit and it could accommodate him. And suddenly he was like, yeah, I'll take the job. And then what ended up happening this week, yesterday, when Albert's story came out, he tweeted, oh, heads will roll. Heads should roll. No one should die in police custody under uncertain circumstances. Yeah, and I'm like, is this like a post-advice approach, or like what is going on over there? It should be immediately you get this job where you get to eat our money. The least you can do is at least make sure that Kenyans are safe. It's a non-negotiable. Like, we can't keep asking, oh, we want to leave. We're tired, bro. Like, we don't have food. We don't have healthcare. People who are growing food don't have anywhere to take it. Like, all our industries are dying, and you're also killing us. And your job as an advisor is to do like a post-advice analysis. Like, your hypocrisy is showing. Like, we can't keep doing this. So if you have the responsibility to make sure that any of the policies being made are supposed to take care of Kenyans, it should be a priority. You shouldn't be tweeting like the rest of us. Maybe you can, I don't know what advisors do. I really wish I could say something that could also help you on your journey to say things, but I don't know. Just like, be better. But like, on a positive note, Beatrice Chebet, I think recorded the fastest time for the 5,000.
I think it was either the first or the second fastest time.
Second fastest time, yes. And I think that is just really cool. At least someone is running towards something good.
Not away from our problems.
Yeah, so congratulations to Beatrice Chebet, and I hope they gave you a lot of money because this economy is bad. And then Helen Obiri won the mini marathon in New York. So shout out to her. People were like, oh, you're washed, you'll never win again. And I'm like, how dare you? So, and also over the weekend the last 2 weeks has been the Roland Garros tournament, which is, people call it the French Open. And Coco Gauff, my fave, she won the women's title, and her opponent, who's the world number 1, Coco is the world number 2. So after Coco won, they usually do pressers, which I think is a bad idea. You've lost, and someone is putting a microphone in your face, being like, how did you feel about losing? I'm like, I will beat you. Like, I would be so violent. But like, Arena got on a microphone and said that Coco did not win because she played her best. She won because
I played badly.
I played badly, and also if she had played another player called Iga. Iga is the former world number one. Iga Swiatek. She's the former world number one. So she Arena was saying if Coco had played Iga, she would have lost. And honestly, I watched the WTA tour. Coco has been really good. She has beaten Arena on tour. She has beaten Iga on tour in straight sets, which is really, really good. And Coco is a really good defender. She might make mistakes on her serves, especially her second serve, but she's very committed. Like, she will fight to the death for a point. And that's why she won. She's a better defensive player. She's very fast. She's very technical. She knows how to, like, spin the ball a little faster, make you run for it, because Arena is a powerful player. She plays with a lot of power. But if it's a short ball, it actually takes the wind out of you. So that's why she lost. And she had so many unforced errors, 70 unforced errors. That's crazy. And maybe part of it was also racism. I don't know. But like, get your life together. You're the world number one. Like, you can actually win these things. You're a good player, so you didn't need to take the L.
Yeah.
And also in the men's tournament, two of my favorites were playing in the final. I was just like, I hope everyone wins, which is not possible.
It's difficult.
Yes. Yeah. So Yannick Sinner, who's I think Italian, was playing Carlos Alcaraz, and Carlos was down. Oh, sorry, Carlos was down. Was only up one set, and then they were on the fourth set, and he was also down. Like, the points he was down in that set was like, I think he was down 2 points. Like, it's 5-3, so you need like a 6 to win. And the opponent, Yannick, was at 40, which is usually like they'll get the 6 point and win that set. But Carlos came back. He locked in so hard, he won that entire title. And the good thing about like watching Carlos is it's like watching a combination of Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, but a much happier version. I think his smile wins people over so easily, and people root for him so hard because he not only plays to win, but he also plays for the joy of the sport and for the love of the opponent. So I'm really happy that Carlos and Coco won. I think it was a redo of like the China Open they did. So congratulations to both of them and to our athletes who keep representing us. Maybe just like to live on a happy note, people in Western found Mary the Mother of Jesus, and like another guy came out as God. And shout out to you guys. I don't know what's happening over there. You have like a religious convention. Call us sometime. I would like to witness this.
Justine, first of all, I did not know that you knew so much about tennis. I'm flabbergasted.
That's my secret.
Where I am, to be honest. Makofi. Well done. I will now start watching tennis with more intent. Ili nikuja nimuulize, Justine, uliona hiyo love ama sijui? Goja, the debate is coming. My parting shots. First of all, let me read one or two comments here. Davis Obatsa on our conversation around informal indicators. He's like, informal indicator for me has to be the lack of snacks in the house. Maze Davis, man. Nikubaya, I'm telling you, you can't kula what's an that ka thing of the ugali. You know that ka hard one now and you pick up the ugali. Hiyo itabidi iwe snack now. When I store too. You can't go to the store. That's true. And Haley says, 18 months into unemployment, and now I know the economy is bad when job opportunities on job sites are only procurement-based jobs or C-suite level jobs in my sector. That's really interesting, how people are reading into what the indicators are for the economy. But I'd like, before we close the show, to wind up with just a little bit of light research that I was doing earlier in the day when I was thinking about Albert Ojwang, that this is such an aberration, right? It seems like an aberration that should never happen in our country, and yet it is not. This is the sadder thing, that there have been people who have died in police custody before Albert that There were inquests. Some of those inquests didn't lead anywhere. I think there's only one in my memory, and at least on the list that I have, that it led to a conviction and a life sentence. So let me just run through some of the names. Martin Kome. In 2013, he was taken to the Ruaraka police station. He was beaten with a metal bar. He died from trauma. Police, I believe at that time, said that he had committed suicide. The OCS from the area, Mutua, eventually was convicted of murder and he was sentenced to death. So he's still serving a life sentence. There's Jason Dindiri Chui. In 2012, in the Kibicho police station, was allegedly hanged in his cell. IPOA recommended an inquest, and the ODPP referred the case back. In 2016, Salim Juma was found dead in his cell. In Nyali police station, again, there was an IPOA investigation and an ODPP referral. And finally, with the news that we had this weekend, Albert Ojwang, head trauma, and the claim was self-harm, right? The autopsy is still pending. We'll know the results tomorrow. But why I say that it would have been perhaps some salve to all of our collective conscience if this was an aberration. But this isn't the first time or the second time or the third time in which the police have been caught with someone in their custody, and that person has either come out with very serious injuries or has passed away. It unfortunately can now start to qualify as somewhat of a trend, especially if you count the number of people who died in police custody, perhaps not in the cells, but in police custody. And obviously the one in most people's living memory was, the Kianjokoma brothers in August of 2021. Now, if this becomes the trend, if this becomes the form book, we really must ask ourselves, what do we really want of our police force? What do we really want of our police service? Do we want them as protectors? Do we want them to continually have this kind of record? Because we have brothers and sisters who are serving in the police force, who should be people who are well, maybe not you, but there's people whose family members who are there, who should be able to hold their heads up high and commit themselves to service and know that people look at them and their professions and their profession as a profession of honor. But right now, that is not what the police represent in this country. We ought to be very, very careful about having an institution like the police come to represent the things that it represents today. Because the police is, and in dictatorships, the iron fist, right? It is the iron fist. Sometimes naked without the velvet glove. And in Kenya, what we want the police to be is a firm hand, but for the people who deserve to be brought to justice, not for young men, teachers who are recently married, who've recently had children, and now are no longer in this world to be able to celebrate whatever milestones their children will have, whatever milestones their family will have, to be the pride of a man who worked literally by breaking stones for years to be able to give this young man an education. That should not and cannot be our legacy, Kenya. And it should shame us all that we are today discussing the murder, likely murder, of a young man, yet another young man, in the custody of the police. This should shake us all and really call us to question our conscience. That next week and the weeks after and the days after, we do not discuss these kinds of things. And one day we might hold our police force, our police service, in honor with other institutions that should be making our country shine. That for me is the final thought that I have for today. But my thanks to you, Ken, for coming in and having a discussion about, all things, with regard to the economy, but also this very interesting and important and saddening topic. And obviously to you, Tom, and to you, Justine, for always imparting the knowledge that you have. And to you, ladies and gentlemen, for interacting with us this week on the podcast. Thank you for all of the comments. I think there's, let's see, Justine, you're being corrected here in YouTube. Eh? Can you go and start arguing with Benedict Luther? He's saying that, correction, Justine, Sina was up by 2 sets and was on championship point in the 4th set after Carlos. Where? Fact checking
No,
live.
I didn't say
Live on the
anything
show.
wrong. I probably said callous instead of sinner.
Yes.
That's why. But
All right.
I was like trying to...
Benedict,
Yeah,
shout out
it
to you
was
for the
fantastic.
fact check.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah, yeah.
you.
We were
Thank
feeling
you.
very small here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are
No,
not
he
the
was a
highest
championship
in
point.
the-
That's true. That's true.
Anyway, thank you guys for watching on your stream on X as well as on YouTube. We'll be back with yet another episode. Great guest next week. Great perspectives and interesting points of view here on The Big Picture. That's it from me. Have a good night or a good day ahead. We'll see you later. Peace.
Hey!